The Not So Dead. Maddy's Story. Written by Isaiyan Morrison. The two-story house that would be their new home was shockingly pedestrian with its plain white siding and its wraparound porch, elevated off the uneven ground on rickety stilts. Maddy wouldn't have chosen the place in a million years. She wasn't at all excited to find herself so near to the West Coast and yet so far from any real urban action. Portland wasn't too far, but she seriously doubted she'd get the chance to visit and check it out. She jumped out of the van and joined Essie. "You couldn't have found us something better?" Maddy asked. Essie walked toward the home. "I only had 2 days, Maddy, so no, sorry," she said sarcastically. She took a quick look around. This place blows just like the last one. The warm air gently lifted her short brown hair. She remained by the vehicle for safety and watched as Dusk opened the trunk, pulled out their luggage. Faye and Tristan joined her seconds later. "Everyone grab your bags." Dusk placed the luggage on the pebbled road, and when he finished, he slammed the door shut and stared at the house. Salome remained by his side, silent and observant. "It's not so bad." Tristan placed his arms on the roof of the car and leaned forward. "Just think about it this way, Maddy. We'll have our own rooms this time, unlike the last place." He placed his black cowboy hat on his head. She followed Essie up to the house. Even the porch looked unsafe, and she waited for Essie to take the first step. The wood creaked ominously beneath her weight. From where she stood, she looked through the window. "You said we'd have furniture," she spoke in a high-pitched voice. "I don't see anything." She pushed back her bangs from her forehead. "We'll buy furniture if we have to," Salome said. Though she was unable to admit that Tristan was somewhat right, their new home didn't look as bad as the last one. It sat on a property that stretched as far as her supernatural sight could see, which wasn't far, due to the partially clouded night sky. There were very few trees in the distance, and she thought she saw a small pond about half a mile away. There were no houses. Nothing. Just this one lonely two-story with peeling white paint and an old rickety porch, but it smelled badly. She titled her head slightly in the air. Her nostrils flared as she picked up different scents carried by the warm wind. She sighed. "How are we supposed to stay here? This place smells like old water." She placed her hands on her hips. Dusk grabbed a purple backpack and held it out to Faye. He didn't have to speak. His behavior spoke for him. He was their leader, and whatever he wanted them to do, they obeyed. No questions asked. Faye thanked him quietly and took it. He then picked up another one, Maddy's dark suitcase, and held it out to her, but she didn't come calling. "Maddy, take your suitcase." Salome's soft voice blanketed the rising tension for now. She stomped heavily toward him, testing his patience by giving him a hardened stare. She snatched the suitcase from his grip and marched back to the house. The bag felt heavier than normal. She didn't recall packing much, but then again, they had to leave in a hurry because of Faye. She remembered ripping her clothes from their hangers and stuffing them haphazardly in the bag, followed by her makeup and a few pair of shoes. She even left her favorite pair behind, and when she wanted to go back for it, Dusk prevented her from doing so. Yet he allowed Faye enough time to go back to her home, grab her things, and speak with her sister. Their home was compromised, and there was no going back. That much Maddy knew. The place they used to call home back in Austin wasn't safe. It was all part of how they survived, according to Dusk. But she wanted to stay there, and she didn't care if someone found them or if Faye's parents came looking for her. "Are you sure about this?" Salome asked. Dusk nodded and kissed her gently on the cheek. "This is the only choice we have right now." Sensing her nervousness, he took her hand. "Don't worry. It's just that we've moved a lot this past year." "Yeah." Tristan took his bag. "We've moved way too much." He joined Maddy on the porch, and with their combined weight, the weathered wood sounded as if it was going to collapse at any moment. "Look on the bright side," he said, nudging Maddy with his elbow. "There's a lot of space." "Essie, thank you," Salome said. You didn't have to find this place for us. Essie smiled. What do you mean? Of course I did. Plus, it's secluded. You don't have to worry about being found out, unless someone does something stupid. No one will. Dusk approached the home. I give Maddy 2 weeks before she goes on her tangent again, Tristan joked. Blow me, she growled. We will be civilized, Dusk spoke, asserting his authority. We aren't mindless beasts. Perhaps not mindless, but we are beasts, Tristan replied. We're wraiths. Maddy grabbed the door handle, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Even without her keen eyesight, there was enough light beaming from the half-moon through the open windows to see her new room. Cautious, she entered. There was one queen-size bed near the back wall, 2 large dressers, and another door leading to the closet. She tossed her suitcase on the bed, and when it landed, a puff of dust lifted in the air. Great, she sighed to herself. She flicked on the light and closed the door behind her. The place wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that great either. No one had stayed here in a long time, and she dreaded all the work it'd take to make this room feel like her own. She approached the window, and the view provided her with a straight shot to the driveway. At least she could see anyone approaching before the others would. The door flew open, and Tristan walked in uninvited. I just wanted to see. His eyes shifted back and forth. Yeah, your room is smaller than mine is. Get out. My room is cleaner than yours, he snickered. So is Faye's. I said get out. Anyway, there's only one bathroom, so we have to share it. Dusk and Salome have their own, and they have the bigger room as usual. I don't care. I know you don't, but I like seeing you spaz out, he replied. You know, doing that isn't going to get you brownie points. Why do you keep speaking back to him? Dusk? Yeah, Dusk. Because he can't keep telling us what we can and can't do, she replied. And we shouldn't have left Austin, just because of her. He took off his cowboy hat and studied it. Faye is new to this. You know how that is. Oh, I know, but still. The rooms inside were smaller than she expected, with peeling wallpaper and a strangely damp smell to them. She backtracked to the far wall. This place is disgusting. She swiped her finger over its surface, and her eyes locked onto the wad of dust now wrapped around her fingernail. There's no way I'm staying here. There has to be mold on these walls or something. I can't live like this. We have lived like this, he corrected her. You just love to complain, don't you? Excuse me if I'm not used to moving from dump to dump. It was part of her that remained the same, even after she had the misfortune of being attacked by a wraith a decade ago, and just like Dusk found Faye, he found her. He tried to help her learn how to control her newfound hunger and increased senses. But with that also came raging anger. She blamed that part of herself on her childhood. She was the kid you picked on at school, the kid born to an alcoholic mother and abusive father. She was used to looking after herself and making her own way, so when he welcomed her into his family of nomads, he expected her to follow his rules. But he would never control her rebellious nature, she told herself. He would never be able to tame that part of her. She wiped her hand on the bed and examined her hands. We should have stayed in Austin. At least that dump is better than this one. You know we couldn't have stayed there. Her parents filed a missing persons report. They're looking all over for her. The best thing we can do is lay low for a little bit. Or we should have left her back in Austin. She opened her suitcase. You really don't like her, do you? She pulled out a shirt and stared at it. It amazed her how much one simple object could bring back a plethora of good memories. She thought about her last place and how everything was close by. Stores, shopping malls. She's the new blood of the bunch, Tristan added. That's why you hate her. All she does is sob about being what she is, and every time, Salome comforts her, Maddy explained. That girl doesn't even want to learn how to leech from humans, and they devote all this time trying to convince her. They never did that for me. Did they do that for you? Back then it was just Dusk and myself, he shrugged. There wasn't any time to explain those things. She can't be a vegetarian baby wraith if she wants to survive. After she pulled the last item from her suitcase, she closed it and placed it underneath her bed. I just want one day, to do what I want to do without having to think about moving and hiding, and we almost had that back in Austin. You thought we almost had that, but we didn't, and we won't. Ever. He placed his hat back on his head and walked for the door. Face it, Maddy. You're just jealous because you're no longer the baby wraith of the family and Salome no longer treats you like one. From her bedroom window, Maddy saw Dusk's blue van come barreling down the road and screech to a halt a few feet from the front porch. She grabbed her pocket mirror and checked herself once over. She ran her fingers through her brown hair and shuffled it around so it lay neatly on her shoulders. She puckered her lips and wiped any lipstick not evenly applied. Satisfied she looked her best, she straightened her clothes before walking out of her room and into the hallway, where she almost ran smack dab into Tristan. Jesus, Maddy, we're only going in town, he commented after he saw her. Don't hate. She followed him to the stairs. Who's hating? He descended down the steps 2 at a time. Regardless of how they dressed, Maddy always wanted to look her best, especially in a new town, with new people. Tristan preferred jeans and his stupid cowboy hat. He could never let go of that. On the other hand, Dusk was more casual and preferred to look like a walking thrift shop. But Salome, she knew how to dress, and she did so extravagantly. Even while she gardened in every dump they called home, she looked her best. She wore a long flower-patterned dress with block heels. She had her waist-length ink-black hair pulled back in one smooth ponytail. Have you seen Faye? Maddy reached the bottom floor. I'm not her babysitter. She didn't stop her stride and headed out. Although the sun had partially set, some of its sunlight blinded her for a second, and she shielded her eyes. It also felt like tiny little pricks on her exposed skin. She heard Salome call out for Faye, and Maddy watched when she appeared on the top steps, with her purple backpack in hand. She looked more casual than everyone else. She sported a black t-shirt and dark blue jeans. She descended the stairs slowly with her eyes glued to the floor. I'll be right by you, don't worry, Salome comforted her. Let's go. Dusk escorted everyone out and closed the door behind them. Essie stepped out of the driver's side and walked around the van. Everything looks okay. We still have to be on our best behavior, Dusk said. Tell Maddy that. Tristan strolled to the van without a care in the world. Salome calmed Faye's nerves with a quick pat on the back. After they climbed into the van, Dusk started the vehicle and sped down the dirt road. Maddy looked back at their new home in the distance. The van took a right and careened down a paved 2-lane road toward town. Salome, who sat in front, rolled down the window, letting the cool breeze blow through the van, which also carried scents of manure and wet grass. The smell of car exhaust increased the closer they came to town, and it was nothing like Maddy imagined. Smaller than metropolitan cities, it was a lot bigger than the previous town before Austin. There were many people walking down the streets. The town spanned 5 blocks, and the biggest building, the Masonic Lodge, was the brightest of all. Across the street, a huge sign which read Silver Spoon Scoops hung over a vintage wannabe ice cream shop. There, Maddy noticed 3 teens hanging around, and she knew that's exactly where she wanted to be. They have bingo night every Friday, Essie explained. So, that's where everyone's going right now. Bingo? Tristan repeated in a long drawl. What's with small towns and bingo? Dusk parked a block away and turned off the vehicle. Okay, I shouldn't have to tell everyone how to act and what's at stake, he said. They're going to know that we're new to town, so remember what I told you. We're wraiths and all we need is just a little of your essence to survive, Tristan joked. Tristan, be serious. As they got out, Maddy kept her eyes on the 3 teens. A tall and bulky male puffed on his cigarette. Smokers were the worst humans to leech from, but it was another male in a black and gray flannel shirt who caught her attention. He also wore a black beanie and his dark hair pulled out at the bottom. He looked every bit a rebellious hipster with his black skinny jeans and carpenter work boots. But unlike a typical hipster, he didn't give off the vibe that he was trying too hard to be cool. He just was that cool and confident. Something about him was unusually appealing, and she wasn't sure if it was just his look or how he carried himself that set him apart from the other two. "You coming or what?" Tristan called out to her. Maddy waved at him to shut up and jogged around the van to catch up. They entered the Masonic Hall, and just as they had planned, bingo was slowly wrapping up. Some of the townspeople had already gathered and now lingered for the next round. Dusk moved through the crowd, introducing himself and his family as the newcomers to town. It didn't take long before a beast of a man introduced himself as the mayor of Silver Falls. He wore gray slacks and a yellow dress shirt with upturned sleeves. He had on black Converse sneakers and the kind of chain a 14-year-old might wear dangling around his beefy neck. There were 2 massive gold rings on his left hand that gleamed in the light when he reached out to shake Dusk's hand. "Jeffers," he said. "And you are?" "We're new to town," Dusk began, but the mayor promptly cut him off. "You're the ones moved into that old rundown house out on what's the name of that street again?" The muscles in Dusk's jaw clenched. "Right, that's us." "Surprised the place is still standing," Mr. Jeffers said. "If you need anything at all, you just let me know. We'll make sure you're set up." He winked and saw someone over Dusk's shoulder. George, excuse me," he said, brushing Dusk aside and merging into the crowd. Maddy stopped herself from laughing out loud, and when she turned to comment to Tristan, she saw that he had slipped away. She wasn't sure when it had happened. Salome and Faye were practically joined at the hip next to Dusk, but neither of them had noticed Tristan's disappearance either. Maddy decided that he had the right idea, and while Dusk complained to Salome about the mayor's manners, she slipped back out the door onto the street again. The teens were still there, and as soon as she spotted them, the tall, handsome one made direct eye contact with her. She crossed the street and approached the group. "Who are you?" A girl with a narrow face and spiky butterscotch-colored hair asked. "Nikki, don't be rude," the attractive teen said with a snicker on his face. Maddy scanned Nikki from head to toe. She then turned her attention to the one who caught her eye earlier. "Maddy?" she said, extending a hand. "Kurt." He didn't shake her hand. "New in town?" She felt their stares on her face. "Yeah. My family and I moved here last night." "And the first thing you do is go to that crappy place to play bingo?" He laughed. "What else is there to do around here?" She snickered. "Not much," the other muscled teen replied. "I'm Brick." She looked at him with sudden focus. Who in the hell would name their child Brick? "His real name is Davy," Kurt said. "Maddy!" Tristan's voice called from across the street. "Dad wants you back here. Now." Maddy couldn't tell if Tristan was just screwing with her or if Dusk really did tell him to call her back. She quickly pulled a pen out of her pocket and grabbed Kurt's hand, scribbling digits across his palm. "This is my number. Call me if you want to have some fun." She turned to go, but Kurt caught her wrist and took the pen out of her hand. He turned her arm over and across her forearm. He scrawled his own number and then winked at her. "I never make the first call," he told her, returning her pen. Maddy laughed and then turned, jogging back across the street to where Tristan waited. He held the door open for her, and as they re-entered the hall, he said, "Already got your first meal lined up?" "Yep, sure do," she said with a smile. "Jealous?" After a week or so, the family's frequent forays into town made them familiar faces, and people were starting to finally call them by name when seeing them around. Though no one else in the family had seemed to notice yet, Maddy slipped into town every so often. It wasn't as difficult to get away from everyone else during the day, except for Tristan, who enjoyed spending time in the sun, which left him with small pockmarks all over his body. Being out, in the sun, wasn't the best thing for a wraith, but she was good at wearing long-sleeve shirts and a baseball cap to hide her skin from the majority of its rays. A few times she'd gone into town just for something to do, for any kind of break from the monotony that was her life at home. Over the course of the past week, her room had finally started to come together. She'd made it feel at least a little livable even though it was still very bare. It would take longer than a week to build her possessions back up. It was taking her equally as long to build up to her leeching. On the nights that she'd snuck into town with Kurt, she'd tried to turn up the flirting pretty heavily, but he was usually pretty good at keeping her at arm's length, though he did so while verbally ramping up his own flirting. They'd only had a few makeout sessions, and she'd gotten only a tiny taste. It really only made her want more, but she was getting frustrated with how long it took. She started to wonder if he was more trouble than he was worth. Since no one seemed to notice her frequent disappearances, she decided not to hide them anymore. Almost every day at the same time, she walked by Dusk, who constantly worked on the southernmost wall in the living room. Apparently, it was a load-bearing wall and one of the beams had rotted from the inside out. Faye stayed in her room, playing video games, so Maddy hardly saw her. And then there was Salome, who toiled for hours in the back of the house trying to transform the bare land into a garden. She'd been at it for days, wearing that same big, floppy, red and black striped sun hat. Being with Kurt was the kind of life Maddy wanted, to be swept off her feet by someone she felt comfortable around. It was a dream that Dusk warned against. He conditioned her to be content with wraith life. He told her she could never be around humans without placing them in danger. But they all knew she was made for city life. Back in Austin, she constantly talked about how much she wanted to find friends her age and hang out downtown on the weekends. She wanted some sense of a normal life, and every time she brought it up, Dusk had to remind her that there wasn't anything normal about the red lines that appeared on her skin whenever she leached from humans or her eyes turning red. There also wasn't anything normal about being stronger than the average person. One night, Kurt took her to the movies and bought her some sparkling lip gloss and a makeup bag after she told him she didn't have one. The following night, they went shoe shopping, where he also bought a pair of black and white dress shoes with heels bigger than any Salome had in her closet. She didn't get along with Nicky, but she did enjoy Brick's company and understood the reason behind his nickname. He was once the star defensive liner on the high school football team, until his grades slipped. Uninterested in school, he dropped out and began hanging around Kurt. The town tolerated their delinquent activities because the mayor allowed it. Jeffers was Kurt's father and a stern man when it came to his son. He defended Kurt and ignored the townspeople's complaints and concerns about the teens. This made hanging out with them rather easy for Maddy. No one dared confront them about what they did late into the night, which also made hunting around the home much easier. In order to keep everyone's mind at ease, Dusk turned to a night animal hunt. It was what they did when he believed that leeching off humans was a risk, and being in the small little town of Silver Falls didn't change that. Maddy was always down for a hunt. She was pretty good at it, along with Tristan. They both tracked their prey with ease and often caught the biggest animals in the territory. He was more sinister in his approach. He preferred to wound his prey and follow it for miles until it succumbed to its injuries. It didn't matter the size, big, small. Meanwhile, Salome stayed with Faye and taught the baby wraith how to survive. Maddy didn't call her a vegetarian wraith for nothing. Even the sight of flesh made Faye's stomach turn. But she knew Salome's disposition and what hid beneath her smiles and soft voice. She knew how dangerous Salome could be and the horrendous things she did as a wraith. One night, Maddy went out on her own, using her keen sense of smell to pick up on a doe and her baby fawn a few miles away. She headed in that direction, hoping that when she arrived, they both would be there. She avoided stepping on every little branch she could within the dense trees so the animals around her couldn't pinpoint her exact position and flee. When she saw her prey, she prepared to let the inner wraith inside her out. It was now or never, and if she screwed up her attack, she'd have to start all over again the next night. According to Dusk, wraiths couldn't go on without feeding unless they wanted to get what he called the death splotch, patches of rotting skin, which spread all over the body the longer they didn't leech. Her eyes burned bright red, sharpening her sight as she narrowed them on the doe and fawn. Her dark, red veins pushed themselves to the surface of her skin as she moved quickly to attack. Her meal didn't see her coming, and she managed to grab the doe's neck with her left hand and the fawn's neck with her right, forcing them to the dirt. They struggled, kicking their hooves. The doe grunted and the fawn made a loud, continuous cry. This didn't stop Maddy from leeching. She started with the fawn by sucking in her essence through her fingertips. She felt the fawn's distress and dread before it went silent. She then moved on to the doe, and now, with both hands, she took in more than enough of its energy that it forced her into a woozy state. After it was over, she lay back on the ground next to the dead deer and zeroed in the night sky. It was the one moment where she felt peace and stability with the dark forces inside her. Maddy? She propped herself up, and with her eyes still blazing red, she saw Kurt. Dressed in a black jacket and dark jeans, she saw a mixture of horror and interest in his eyes. He wondered out loud, "Oh my God, what did you just do?" She blinked to rid herself of her distracting color change and to look somewhat normal, besides the pebbles of dirt that remained on her face and arms. "What are you doing here?" She stood up. "You can't be here." "How did you do that?" Now he circled around the dead doe and fawn. "How did you kill them like that?" "You have to go. Now." "And how did you float like that when you ran at them?" He didn't stop with his questions. "Maddy, what are you?" This was the worst-case scenario for any wraith. No human could know about them, and with Kurt now being a prime witness to her late-night hunt, there was no other option but to kill him. It was a rule that Dusk stressed in every town they lived in. There were no exceptions to it. But she didn't want to kill him. "Oh, Kurt, you really shouldn't have come here," her voice cracked. "I wanted to stop by and surprise you," he answered. "Well, you surprised me." He couldn't take his eyes off the dead animals. "Your eyes were red, and it looked like there were dark trail thingies on your skin." She rubbed her forehead. "They're going to kill me. Actually, they're going to kill you." "Who?" "My family." "They're all like you, aren't they?" "Listen to me." She placed her hands on his shoulders. "You can't tell anyone about this. I mean it. Not your father, Brick, Nikki. No one. If you do, it'll make things worse." "Were you born like this, or did someone make you like this?" he asked, ignoring her statement. "Are you listening to me? You can't tell anyone. Ever." On their right, she heard rustling in the bushes. "Go home. I'll meet you tomorrow night. Ice cream shop, okay?" Taking his hand, she attempted to drag him away, but it was a little too late. She smelled Tristan and Essie just beyond the bushes, and when they appeared, Maddy knew exactly what Tristan planned to do. She purposely stood in front of Kurt to protect him. If anything, she could at least bide Kurt some time to run by keeping Tristan at bay. However, Essie was the biggest threat. She told Dusk everything, and Maddy didn't doubt that she'd run back to the house and tell him about Kurt. "Now what is going on here?" Tristan tipped the front of his cowboy hat up, revealing his face. Maddy swallowed. "Let me explain." "Explain what? He saw you, didn't he?" "You can't tell them." "But he saw you," Essie replied. "Essie, don't. I can take care of this." "His father is the mayor," Tristan pointed out. "Do you know what that means?" "Yeah, it means we can't kill him," Maddy said. "Look, this is between Kurt and I." He saw. "It involves the family now. You can't deny that," Essie continued. "He won't tell anyone." She looked over her shoulder at him. "Right?" Kurt nodded. "Yeah, no one." "Not good enough." Tristan approached. "Sorry, kid." Maddy held her arm out to stop him. "I don't ask for anything from you two. This time I'm asking. I'm begging you both to not say anything. Please." Tristan wavered. "Maddy." His eyes moved from her to Kurt. "You know I can't." He took another step. "I'll turn him," she shouted. Tristan paused. "I'll turn him. Tomorrow." "Dusk won't allow that," Essie commented. "He wouldn't turn me." "I'm not Dusk," Maddy replied. "I'll turn Kurt. Tomorrow." Tristan sighed. "You did say there are too many females in this family. I'll turn him." He shook his head. Essie's right. Dusk won't allow it. Then I'm leaving this family. Dusk won't allow that either. Again, Essie spoke. He can't force me to stay. Either I turn Kurt or I walk. Tristan slowly took his cowboy hat off his head. You're playing a dangerous game. I hope you know what you're doing. I'm not stupid. I know what I'm doing. The following night, an hour after sunset, Maddy opened her eyes. Realizing she'd slept past her normal time, she jumped out of bed. From the corner of her eye, she saw a red dot flashing on her cell phone. She grabbed it and noticed she had a new unread message Kurt sent 2 hours ago. See you tonight. She stared at the message on her cell phone before she replied, Remember, don't tell anyone. She read the conversation quietly, over and over, anxious to see if he'd send her another message. Nothing. She figured he was getting ready, and she didn't waste any time. She searched her closet for clothes. Everything had to be perfect, and not only to make the night memorable. Tonight, she would bring Kurt into her life. This was her moment. This was what she was waiting for. But first, she had to tell Dusk. In 10 minutes, she had already dressed herself, freshened up, and combed her hair. She told herself that no matter what, her short black dress was perfect for the occasion. This time, things were going to be perfect. Her life felt perfect. Nothing, including Dusk's stupid rules or even the cool weather, would ruin that. She rushed downstairs in seconds and realized that no one was home. She searched the entire house, and only after she opened the front door did she see a disheveled Tristan strolling up to pathway. Dusk, Salome, and Faye followed, and when they walked in, they didn't make eye contact with her. Expect Dusk. Maddy, we need to talk. Tristan, would you be a dear and take Faye up to her room and help her pack? Salome asked. She too looked as if she rolled around in dirt. Tristan took off his cowboy hat. Yeah. He climbed the steps, 2 at a time, with Faye behind him. Pack? Maddy asked. Are we moving again? Dusk nodded. Essie left early this morning to our next home. He stood near the front door, silent and observant for what felt like an eternity to Maddy. Did you think we wouldn't find out about Kurt? They told you? Her shoulders sagged. Essie told us first, Salome said, and later Tristan confirmed her story. Oh, Maddy, Dusk said with disappointment in his voice. This is what happens when you disrespect our rules. They're in place for a reason. Your rules, she pointed at him, not mine. He saw you. And he promised not to tell anyone. We can't take that risk. You both always think the worst, don't you? I have to, Dusk replied. She rolled her eyes. You wanted to come here, not me. After placing her hands on her hips, Salome sighed. It's more than that, Maddy. She jabbed her finger in Dusk's face. We shouldn't have left Austin for Faye. We should have stayed. We deserve to live just like they do. And how do you expect to stand up to the humans? I would have stood my ground and fought for what's mine. That's what wraiths do. Sit down. His voice appeared to echo throughout their home, and she sat without a thought. With his eyes a carmine red, he now towered over her. We wanted to make this place our permanent home, and now that won't happen. Every time we move, you tell us that it's our permanent home, she said with her teeth clenched. And we move to stay alive. You have to understand, Maddy, we move because we don't have a choice. That boy would have exposed us, Salome added. Would have? Dusk's eyes reverted back to brown. Listen. He knelt in front of her and took her hand. It's my duty to protect you and everyone in my family. Dusk, what happened? He lowered his head. She slipped her hand from his and stood up. No, don't tell me you... We did what we had to do, Salome responded. We did it quickly to make sure he didn't feel any pain. Her heart felt heavy, burdened with the hard truth. They murdered Kurt. They took his life and purposely did so without telling her. Maddy, you must listen to us. Her eyes widened and turned red. I'm going to kill both of you. Salome had heard enough. She raised her hand and backhanded Maddy across the face. Her actions surprised Dusk, who covered his mouth with his palm. Go to your room, she growled in a low voice, and pack your things. We're leaving tonight. Frozen in shock, Maddy didn't move. It was unlike Salome to put her foot down, especially with brute force. Dusk usually handled the arguments, yet he never raised a hand to anyone in their family. You didn't have to kill him. Yes, we did, Dusk replied. We had to kill them all. Maddy learned later that Kurt wasn't the only innocent person they slaughtered to protect their family's secret. After hearing a commotion in his son's room, Kurt's father walked in unexpectedly. After, they located Nikki and Brick, who Tristan easily took care of. With so many deaths in one night, they had no choice but to leave. Maddy crammed her belongings into her black suitcase before she zipped it shut. It was just like the last time, except now it was her fault. She tried not to dwell on those thoughts. She hadn't done anything to cause what happened to Kurt. It was all Dusk and Salome. Ready yet? Tristan stood in the doorway. We're waiting on you. I'm done. She grabbed her suitcase and headed for the door when he stopped her. I'm sorry, Maddy. Yeah, I'm sure you are. Wasn't my decision? Of course it wasn't. You just opened your big mouth, that's all. Hey, I didn't have a choice. You know how Dusk can be when he gets angry? Nikki and Brick? Maddy questioned. Really? Guilty by association, I guess. He placed both hands on her shoulders and gave a squeeze. Surprisingly, he didn't have a sarcastic remark for her. He was being oddly comforting instead. He'll understand when you get the chance to explain, but for now, just wait it out. She pushed him aside. I do know one thing. I'm going to leave this fucked up family. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. She made her way down the stairs and out the front door. She walked across the groaning porch, down the steps, and toward the back of the van. She tossed her suitcase on top of Faye's purple backpack before slamming the doors shut. We're all set, Dusk, Tristan said as he closed the front door. Are you sure? Dusk asked. Yeah, I wiped the entire place down. Tristan climbed into the back of the van. We should be good. Maddy climbed in the back seat and sat next to Faye, who only watched her with wary eyes. In the front seat, Salome glanced back and she too said nothing before looking straight ahead again. The van moved slowly down the driveway before making a right onto the road. But you're the one who chose Kurt. You didn't listen to Dusk, Maddy reminded herself. She knew it was foolish to avoid the blame. She let her feelings control her and vowed never to let that happen again. This has been The Not So Dead. Maddy's story, written by Isaiyan Morrison.